The next page is the front cover of N64 Magazine, featuring Luigi looking a bit spooked from Luigi's Mansion on the GameCube. There's also a feature on Game Boy Advance games, and a little Earth character playing a Nintendo 64. It mentions Mario Party 3, Kirby 64, Tony Hawk's 2 and Metroid Prime, Star Fox Adventures, Pikmin, Donkey Kong Racing, Cameo, Dave Mirra BMX2, Wave Race and The Legend of Zelda for the Game Boy. Good memories of that Zelda title, couple of SNES classics on the go. The next page is the Welcome to N64 Magazine page, issue 57, from August 2001, welcoming readers to a jam-packed edition. They boast about being Britain's biggest and best-selling Nintendo magazine, attributing this to their exclusive first-hand news from correspondents in Europe, Japan and America. Plus, they're not just copying rumors off the internet. The team consists of deputy editor Mark Green, production editor Steve Jalim, art editor Justin Webb, deputy art editor Paul Edwards, and staff writers Alan Madrell and Geraint Evans. The magazine prides itself on covering games available in the UK, avoiding padding with Japanese exclusive titles. They're committed to honest reviews, so if a game is awful, they'll say so. This month's highlights include Game Boy Advance coverage, Mario Party 3, and a GameCube blowout. Also mentioned are Luigi's Mansion and 2 essential Zelda games on Game Boy Color. Finally, there's a promotion for £5 off an N64 game. The next page is the contents page for issue 57, August 2001. Right, so the big hitters this month, it seems, are Kirby 64, the Crystal Shards and Mario Party 3. Always good to see what's coming up in the coming soon section too. Eternal Darkness, eh? That one turned out alright. There's also a look at Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, and Dave Mirra Freestyle BMX2, both decent enough games at the time. Not forgetting the latest on The Legend of Zelda on the Game Boy. It was a good time to be a gamer, alright? They are also doing coverage of GBA and GameCube in the information station. Newsdesk is showing the Ninty World, and N64 Arena is reviewing completed games. Import Arena is covering the latest Japanese and American games. Also an N64 section, with new virtual reality tech. The next page features the contents of the magazine. We've got a future look at big new games starting on page 6, including Luigi's Mansion for the GameCube, and Wave Race Blue Storm, also for the Cube. There's the N64 Club 64 mailbox feature, and a how-to guide for Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine. Tips Extra offers assistance for games, and Game On covers Majora's Mask trials. I'm the Best is all about top game scores, while Skill Club Millennium offers fresh challenges. Dr. Kit's Game Clinic is there to help, and the directory rates every N64 game. Finally, there's info on subscriptions. The GameCube gets a blowout with Super Smash Bros. Melee, with a sneak peek on page 22. There's an interview with Shigeru Miyamoto, Shigsy Speaks, Finally, on page 26. Rare on GameCube is covered on page 28. This page is a preview of upcoming games in N64 Magazine. The main focus is on Luigi's Mansion for the GameCube, which back then was generating a lot of buzz with its quirky ghost hunting gameplay. There's also a mention of Wave Race Blue Storm, another GameCube title. The anticipation rating for Luigi's Mansion is high, with all 5 circles filled in, which is a good sign. The article also highlights some interesting gameplay elements, such as the effect of time in the game, and the control system. Bundokus. The next page features a preview of Luigi's Mansion on the GameCube. They're touting it as a showcase for the system's graphics, particularly the lighting effects. It mentions how Luigi moves smoothly as the torch illuminates his field of vision, and the vacuum cleaner can be upgraded. It's funny to see them talking about Shigeru Miyamoto like some legendary figure, but I suppose he kind of was, wasn't he? This page is a preview of Wave Race Blue Storm for the GameCube. It's touting the graphical improvements and gameplay enhancements over the original N64 Wave Race. The reviewer seems impressed with the water effects and the sense of speed, and there is a little table summarizing the key details. It's a Nintendo game, supports 14 players, has Rumble, and was slated for a spring release in the UK. The anticipation rating is pretty high, with all 5 blobs filled. The next page showcases Wave Race Blue Storm for the GameCube, Nintendo's shiny new console at the time. The reviewer is clearly impressed with the water effects, comparing them to Metal Gear Solid 2. There are some jibes about the in-game speech, but overall it's shaping up to be a worthy successor to the N64 Wave Race. They mention improved controls on the GameCube like crouching and camera tweaks, plus the addition of turbo boosts and water features, like underwater weeds that slow you down. The stunts are apparently the same as the N64 version, which is fair enough, they were good stunts. This page dives straight into the Nintendo GameCube, back when it was the hot new thing. It talks about Nintendo's plans to launch the console and beat the Xbox. There's mention of Yamauchi's confidence after E3, and the planned release dates for Japan and the US September 14th and November 5th respectively. A February release for Europe was being speculated. The article mentions the projected sales figures of 4 million GameCubes worldwide by March 2002, along with 10 million copies of games. Satoru Iwata chimes in with Nintendo's philosophy on marketing, and there's a veiled dig at Microsoft's Xbox. The final part covers the Nintendo Space World show in Tokyo, as the last stop before the Japanese launch, and teases Zelda and Mario games coming to the GameCube. Mario Sunshine is specifically mentioned, along with a new joypad and games from developers like Sega, Capcom, Konami and Namco. This page kicks off with some shortcuts, starting with 9 Sega Show, where it mentions the burgeoning love affair between Nintendo and Sega, with rumors circulating about a joint exhibition for mid-August's Tokyo Space World show. Then there's a GBA trick. After mucking around with our Game Boy Advance, we've unearthed a little secret. THQ announces 15 GameCube titles, headlined by WWF WrestleMania. The publisher who brought WWF No Mercy and Star Wars Rogue Squadron to the N64 has announced they're working on up to 15 titles for the GameCube. Other GameCube titles on their way from THQ include MX 2003 featuring Ricky Carmichael and Jimmy Neutron, Boy Genius for Spring 2002 and Rugrats, SpongeBob SquarePants Rocket Power and Scooby-Doo for Autumn. Most exciting of all is Tetris Worlds, developed by Blue Planet, the same folk behind the upcoming GBA version. Finally, Perfect Dark 2 is confirmed, and Joe Dark TV show is also on its way. Perfect Dark 2 is now officially on GameCube's agenda, and scheduled for release in autumn 2002. Confirmation of the sequel to one of the N64's greatest games came from the unlikeliest of places, a press release issued by 2 American TV production companies, Fireworks Entertainment and Goodman Rosen Productions. The release described how the pair are planning movies and TV shows based on Perfect Dark, FICE. The next page kicks off with some intriguing news snippets. First up, Resident Evil 0 on the GameCube, alongside rumors that the original Resident Evil might also grace Nintendo's new console with enhanced features. Capcom clearly keen on porting their back catalog. Then there's word that US investment company Merrill Lynch have upgraded Nintendo stock from accumulate to buy, anticipating strong GameCube sales. Monthly flipperchip production, that's the GameCube's processor, has also ramped up nicely, so it's all looking good for Nintendo. On the GBA front, other developers are cottoning onto the sound engine used in Iridion 3D. Tony Hawk's Skateboarding 2, Spider-Man, Mysterio's Menace, Earthworm Jim, and F-14 Tomcat amongst other Game Boy Advance titles will be incorporating the GAX technology. The main article focuses on the upcoming Nintendo UK show, set to be held at Westminster Central Hall. Word is, it'll be a fusion of E3 GameCube and Game Boy Advance content. David Golson from Nintendo is quoted promising a unique experience for the European audience. The right-hand side of the page covers Sega's plans, with talk of Daytona USA, Phantasy Star Online V2 heading to the GameCube. Sonic Team, Amusement Vision and AM2 are said to be developing for the console. Virtua Fighter 4, Ferrari 355 Challenge, and even Shenmue are mentioned. Intriguingly, the final part of the Shenmue trilogy isn't appearing on Dreamcast, so a GameCube release may be on the cards. GC Monkey Ball and Phantasy Star Online V2 have already appeared on American release lists. There is also mention that Satoru Iwata sees himself as a middleman in the whole process of linking the giants. Finally, there are screenshots of Shenmue 2, Phantasy Star Online, and Jet Set Radio Future, with Jet Set Radio possibly making its way to other consoles. The next page features new goods for the Game Boy Advance, including accessories like the battery grip, link cable, light magnifier, GBA roll cage, and starter pack. You know, all the usual bits and bobs we were tempted to buy back then. There's also a mention of the Virus game from Xeon Limited, a watch-like device that promised access to great games but ultimately ended up in the bin, according to the reviewer. A competition to win a GBA roll cage, by answering a simple question about where rubber comes from, rounds out the page. The next page features a section called Retro World, focusing on older games. It mentions Nintendo's Earthbound on the SNES, praising its quirky nature and unique elements, like taming enemies rather than defeating them. It also talks about Ice Climber on the Nintendo Entertainment System, a simple yet challenging game where you climb and collect aubergines. The screenshots showcase the retro graphics of both games. There are also some old-school controllers scattered around the top of the page, like the original Nintendo Entertainment System controller, the Super Nintendo Entertainment System controller, and the Virtual Boy controller. Elsewhere on the page, there's news about the Game Boy Advance. Nintendo apparently included a picture of the GameCube on the back of the Game Boy Advance box as a sneaky bit of advertising. There's also talk of a new Game Boy Advance peripheral called the AirWire that allows wireless connectivity between up to 4 units, and possibly with the GameCube too. Lastly, there's a quote from Dennis Dyack of Silicon Knights, who criticizes catch-all consoles and praises the GameCube's dedication to pure gaming. He predicts that some platforms will fail and companies will go under. The next page delves into Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 on the N64. Back in the day, everyone was buzzing about this game, and rightly so. It was a solid port of a great title. The Q&A section addresses a common question. Is it all set in the USA? Thankfully the answer is no, with levels set in Marseille and even a bullring, adding some welcome variety. There's also talk about new multiplayer modes, including a tournament mode, and an upgraded version of HORSE, plus a skate tag game which sounds like a laugh. Ray. The main article highlights the ability to create a base skater, and even create a bay park, a feature that made the game stand out. They mention the trick system getting a lot of attention, with the manual being key to stringing together combos. It also mentions the PlayStation version is similar, however the N64 version is exclusive in some ways. The info burst panel gives the lowdown. It's a 128 megabits cart, supports 1 or 2 players, has controller and rumble pack support, but no transfer pack. The release is slated for autumn in the UK, with a high anticipation rating. The article also notes that Activision were aiming to avoid a restrictive certificate, so the blood and some of the more smutty song lyrics may vanish. This was a common concern at the time, as we were always worried about censorship. Screenshots show off some of the levels, including the bullring and the schoolyard. One caption jokingly warns about a face-breaking drop. Overall, the reviewer seems pretty stoked for this one, and so was I back then. The next page features Dave Mirra Freestyle BMX, 2 inches for the GameCube. The reviewer is clearly trying to stoke the rivalry with Tony Hawk's franchise, suggesting that Dave Mirra is coming to unseat the Miracle Boy. They mention the game boasts over 1,500 trick possibilities, and that the cities in the game are alive, unlike those in Tony Hawk's Pro Skater. A Q&A section highlights the presence of real-life company logos, multiplayer minigames, and the sheer size of the levels. The reviewer also notes a full replay mode. An info burst panel provides details such as it is made by Acclaim, and that the game supports 1 or 2 players. The release date is slated for 2002. This page is a double-page spread from the magazine, kicking off with a Q&A. The first game is Pikmin for the GameCube, which was a bit of a head-scratcher at first, wasn't it? Shigeru Miyamoto's garden antics manifested into a game where you're herding little plant-like creatures. The graphics were impressive for the time, with attention to detail. The lack of multiplayer was a bit of a downer, mind. Then, it's on to Eternal Darkness, also for the GameCube. This one was promising some psychological horror, something a bit different from the usual zombie shooters. Apparently it had been in development for a while, spanning both N64 and GameCube. The reviewer was teasing some unsettling elements, like character limbs falling off. Silicon Knights had a reputation for pushing boundaries, so this one had potential. Cree. The next page has a preview of Virtua Striker 3 for the GameCube, with the tagline, Sega have us dribbling. They were obviously keen, and the screenshots looked decent enough for the time. The article mentions the lack of FIFA licenses, so no real player names, but they seemed impressed with the graphics, even mentioning authentic-looking grass patterns. There's also a Q&A section, confirming it's an arcade-style football game with simple controls. A little info burst has details like 14 players, rumble function, and no online play. Anticipation rating is all full, so they thought it would be good. Below that is Metroid Prime, with the heading, Ready the Earmuffs, Samus is back, with big guns. They mention the positive reaction at E3, but also that it's still far from finished. The screenshots do look pretty atmospheric, and they compare the interior designs to Perfect Dark. They suggest Retro Studios need to iron out the jerkiness from the E3 showing, but overall, they sound excited. Another info burst confirms it's a GameCube title from Nintendo, supporting 14 players rumble, and a maybe for online play. The article notes that the Metroid team has online experts pushing for internet deathmatching. Also mentions that this is Samus's first 3D outing. This page is a special investigation feature on Super Smash Bros. Melee for the GameCube. It notes the Japanese release date as September and November for the US, Spring 2002 for Europe. It also states it's from Nintendo, plays 14 players, has a rumble function, and an anticipation rating with all 5 stars lit up. The article highlights the game's visual detail and intuitive controls, referencing characters like Mario, Peach, Pikachu and Fox McCloud. The author, Alan Madrell, mentions getting to play the game at E3, and that it was a game they couldn't leave alone. There are screenshots of the game, mentioning the stage matter is dangerous, along with captions of how good the in-game level looks. The article also mentions trophies and characters like Kid Icarus and an F-Zero hovercar. The next page we're looking at is a bit of a speculative piece, seemingly from August 2001. It's all about what could be coming to the GameCube, back when that was the hot new console on the horizon. There's talk about BioWare doing a Star Wars RPG for the system, which is interesting to think about in hindsight. We also see Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3 getting a mention as a dead cert for the GameCube, which makes sense given the popularity of the series back then. The main focus seems to be on the upcoming Super Smash Bros. Game for the GameCube. We get a look at some screenshots and details about new characters joining the roster, like Sheik, Peach, the Ice Climbers, and Bowser. They even mention the possibility of secret characters like Luigi and Kid Icarus being included. I remember the excitement around unlocking characters back then. It was a proper buzz, really added to the game. Town. They've got little blurbs about why you'd pick each character, their moves, and how they might play. It's all very forward-looking and based on speculation, but it captures the anticipation around the GameCube launch perfectly. This page from what looks like a magazine called N64 delves into the new levels featured in Super Smash Bros. Melee on the GameCube. It seems like Shigsy, most likely referring to Shigeru Miyamoto, was turning a Space World Mario demo into a game titled 100 Marios. The article, Leveling the Lands, highlights several stages. There's the F-Zero track, a series of platforms from the classic N64 racer, which looked pretty darn cool at the time. Then there's Ness's level, which, admittedly, isn't much to look at until you notice the traffic and the detailed city skyline. Great Bay from Majora's Mask is there too, with a view from the laboratory. And of course Pokémon Stadium, a clear recreation of the classic area for Pokémon battles, with snazzy camera angles for the action. Congo Jungle makes an appearance, a familiar place with the added hazard of a raging river. The Gubbins section touches on some tweaks in Melee, including new Pokémon attacks and weapons, like the Superscope 6 SNES light gun, and a golden globe that spits out food, borrowed from Paper Mario of all places. It's pretty intense. The next page features a preview of Super Smash Bros. Melee for the GameCube. The reviewer seems pretty impressed, calling it a pantwetting experience, and highlighting the constant madcap action and blistering speed, saying that the single-player mode has been massively improved, taking the form of a side-scrolling beat-em-up. They mention that the controls may take some getting used to, but that it's easy to get to grips with. There are screenshots of the game, showcasing the single-player mode, and various characters in action, and their damage percentage. It also poses the question, is Mario playable in Luigi's Mansion? And notes Shigeru Miyamoto might change the GameCube joypad's C-stick. The page ends by encouraging readers to narrow their eyes, get close to the magazine and enjoy. This page is a special interrogation feature with Shigeru Miyamoto, the granddaddy of gaming as they call him. Miyamoto discusses his early life, his parents' initial disappointment with his career choice, and his creative process, which involves doodling and creating a fun atmosphere. He talks about finding the basic element of fun in a game, and helping his team see the overall picture. He touches upon the GameCube's ease of development, and his involvement in multiple projects. He shares his thoughts on online games, his personal gaming habits including playing Tetris, and his interest in nature and gardening, which inspired Pikmin. A screenshot of Pikmin is shown on the page. There's also a glimpse of what the final box art for GameCube titles like Luigi's Mansion might look like. Cool. This page is an interview with Shigeru Miyamoto, the big cheese at Nintendo. It's titled C Speaks, and it's all about his thoughts on various GameCube and N64 projects in August 2001. He chats about the development of Luigi's Mansion, the possibility of a grown-up Mario, and Metroid Prime. He also mentions a gardening game that eventually became Pikmin. He discusses the lower cost of GameCube discs, potentially leading to more niche Japanese games making their way west, and that the Director's Cut games can now be seen on discs, due to the end of cartridges. Lastly, he reveals that his favorite game he's worked on is Donkey Kong. There's also a shot of Donkey Kong and Mr. Miyamoto holding the disc of Luigi's Mansion. The The next page delves into Rare's potential plans for the Nintendo GameCube. The headline screams Rare on GameCube, and confirms that the UK's finest coders are sticking with Nintendo's new console. It's a special investigation by Geraint Evans and Mark Green. The article mentions that the Japanese release of the GameCube is just 2 months away from the time of writing. It touches upon the possibility of Rare developing exclusive games for the GameCube, building on their legacy with N64 titles such as Donkey Kong 64, Perfect Dark, and Blast Corps. The feature teases Rare treats, hinting at 3 games in particular, but doesn't confirm anything yet. The article then speculates on 3 possible titles: Perfect Dark 2, Conker's BFD 2, and Sabre Wulf, all for the GameCube. Perfect Dark 2 is teased because of a pre-E3 GameCube list, but Nintendo quickly took it down. The article mentions Conker's BFD 2 due to trademarks for Conker's Other Bad Fur Day and Grabbed by the Ghoulies. Sabre Wulf is also mentioned. The next page presents a special investigation into Donkey Kong Racing. It highlights that it was originally an Xbox exclusive, now on its way to GameCube. It was due for 2002. There are screenshots from a demo, speculating on the potential gameplay in various racing environments, from beaches and jungles to underwater and in the clouds. Characters such as Taj, Diddy Kong and Tiny Kong are mentioned, alongside the possibility of racing on various animals like ostriches, rhinos, bees, and even a swordfish. There's a bit of speculation thrown in, wondering if Lord Wu Fak Fak from Banjo-Tooie might make an appearance as a boss. The screenshots provide a glimpse of what could have been. It's a shame it never saw the light of day. In it, Warrington's as a boss. The next page features a special investigation into Star Fox Adventures, Dinosaur Planet for the GameCube, quite the departure from its SNES and N64 predecessors. In it, the game's described as a Zelda beta, and it seems Rare has expanded Fox's adventures across 12 planets. It delves into environments like pastures, glaciers, dungeons, and ancient ruins. The page includes an info burst with details. It's coming from Nintendo/Rare, on 1 disc, supports 1 player, has rumble functionality, no GBA link-up, and no online play. The anticipation rating is high. There's also a small article speculating possible sequels to Blast Corps and Jet Force Gemini on the GameCube. The next page delves into Star Fox Adventures, or as it started out, Dinosaur Planet on the N64. It offers a look at how the game evolved during development. It touches on old versus new elements, highlighting changes in bosses, environments, and even the storyline. It then moves on to the friends you'll encounter in the game: Slippy Toad, Peppy Hare, Rob the Robot, and Crystal. Tricky the Triceratops gets a mention as well, detailing his role as Fox's sidekick, and the innovative ways Rare was planning to use him throughout the adventure. General Scales gets a mention too. This page is a special investigation into Kameo, Elements of Power, a GameCube title from Nintendo and Rare. The magazine writers were impressed with what they saw at E3, particularly the visuals. It's described as a Pokemon-style monster collecting game with 60 creatures. There's an info burst section that details the game's specs. It's coming from Nintendo/Rare on 1 disc, supports 1 player and rumble functionality but no GBA link-up or online play. The release date is slated for 2002, in the US, UK, and Japan. The anticipation rating is high across the board. The article mentions the game involves monster battles, featuring mini cutscenes and health bars for enemies. One section titled, Dinner Time, talks about keeping your monsters healthy by feeding them glowing worms. This page is a preview of Kameo, which at the time was intended for the GameCube. The article focuses on the monster catching aspect of the game, detailing how you catch, evolve, morph into, and command monsters. Screenshots show Kameo in monster form, landscapes, and enemies. There is also a teaser for the next month's developer, promising never-before-seen shots of an incredible GameCube title. Games mentioned on the page include Monkey Ball, Sergeant Cruz, and Mortal Kombat. The next page is a cover for N64 Planet Presents Game Boy, issue 32, from August 2001. It's got a cool illustration of Link from the Oracle of Ages/Seasons games for the Game Boy Color. The magazine boasts reviews and tips for Game Boy Advance, Pocket, Camera and Printer. Looks like they're giving away 5 action replay cheat cards for the Game Boy and Game Boy Advance too. Tricky. Inside, they've reviewed Iridian 3D, a sci-fi shooter for the Game Boy Advance, and Capcom Mania, featuring coin-op classics like 1942, Ghosts and Goblins, Dragon's Lair on Game Boy Color, and Mega Man Extreme. Plus there's some stuff about the Game Boy Advance going from strength to strength, verdicts on the best new Advance titles, tips for the newest Game Boy Color and Game Boy Advance games, and Professor Oak tackling a Pokemon TCG trial. Good times. This page delves into the launch of the Game Boy Advance, and it's amusing to see how the Americans went absolutely mental for it, while we Europeans were a bit more restrained, or perhaps sane. There's talk of Nintendo bucks, and crazed attempts to grab prizes, which sounds like a right laugh, or a sweaty nightmare depending on your disposition. They reckon Nintendo learned from past marketing mistakes by targeting a slightly older audience, which makes sense given the disposable income of us old SNES gamers wanting to relive our glory days. And there's mention of a GameCube on the horizon, which was exciting news back then. There's also a section listing retailers, like Game and Virgin, offering the Game Boy Advance at launch, with various bundles and prices. Ah, the good old days of physical game shopping, innit? The next page kicks off with a preview of upcoming Game Boy Advance first-person shooters, Dark Arena, and X vs. Sever. Dark Arena is described as the faster, more frenzied of the two, with a plot about genetically engineered scumbags charming. X vs. Sever, based on the film, takes a more realistic approach with real-world weapons and stealthier gameplay. There's also a piece on Bonks, a rather curious-looking GBA game described as a cross between a racer and a puzzler, where you control a cube and strategically place blocks, and it at least looks colorful. The page wraps up with a competition to win an action replay cheat cartridge for the GBA or Game Boy, asking a question about Morse code for GBAs. A must-have for any serious cheater back then. This page is a review of Zelda Oracle of Seasons and Zelda Oracle of Ages on the Game Boy Color. The reviewer seems pretty chuffed with them, giving them a solid 5-star rating. They're calling it a must-have, comparing the gameplay to Link's Awakening, but with a bigger map and more puzzles. The reviewer points out the games were developed by Capcom, and the article emphasizes that the two games are distinct, each with their own storyline, characters, and weapons. There are some screenshots showcasing different aspects of the games, like chasing ghosts, finding hiding places, and planting gacha seeds. It mentions different ways to travel in the game, such as with Rocky the Kangaroo, and Moosh the Flying Bear. This page is a review of the Oracle of Ages and Oracle of Seasons games for the Game Boy Color. They are described as arguably the finest 2D Zelda titles ever. The review highlights the ring-collecting subquest and the puzzles that involve shifting seasons and time, feeling like Zelda stalwarts a sense of déjà vu. Screenshots from the games showcase gameplay and puzzle elements, and a little bit of help is given to complete certain parts. The next page is a review of the Game Boy Advance title, Final Fight 1. The reviewer seems pretty chuffed that Capcom has delivered a decent arcade conversion of the classic 80s beat-em-up. They mention that other attempts like Crave's Fighting Force and Square's Bouncer didn't quite hit the mark. Bit harsh on the bouncer there, remember that? Final Fight 1 lets you choose from Haga, Cody, and Guy, each with their own special abilities, to clean up the streets. The review points out the game's simplicity, but praises its vintage arcade feel, highlighting the satisfying beatdowns you can deliver. It also mentions the variety of weapons and enemies, as well as the fun car-smashing bonus stages. The reviewer gives it a solid 4 out of 5, and recommends grabbing a slice of arcade gaming history. It was a good game but not perfect. There's a section dedicated to the characters, describing Haga as a powerhouse, Cody as a street boxer with agility, and Guy as the fastest but weakest. There are also screenshots showing the gameplay and bonus stages with some tips. Haga ensures that you'll dish out backbreaking moves left, right, and center. Pressing A and B together enables you to take out enemies from all sides at once, in exchange for life. Along the way you'll find weapons and food to help you in battle. That's more like it. Once again you'll get the chance to smash up a car in this vintage Capcom bonus stage. The next page features a triple review of Game Boy Advance titles. First up is Earthworm Jim, and the reviewer seems a bit lukewarm about it. They acknowledge the original's popularity on the SNES and Mega Drive, but question whether a straight port is really what GBA owners wanted. The reviewer awards it a 3 out of 5, suggesting it's only for hardcore nostalgia buffs. Then there's Army Men Advance, which gets a similar middling score, 3 out of 5. The reviewer compares it to Perfect Dark on the Game Boy Color, but finds it ultimately average, criticizing the AI and repetitive levels. Finally, Namco Museum is examined. The reviewer succinctly covers Pole Position, Galaga, Galaxian, Dig Dug, and Ms. Pac-Man, concluding that the package is a bit shoddy and not worth the asking price, giving it a 2 out of 5. They wonder where this retro madness will end, which is a fair point, it's still going on now. The next page features reviews for 2 Game Boy Advance games, Fire Pro Wrestling and Ready to Rumble, Round 2, DAO. Fire Pro Wrestling gets a solid 4 out of 5. The reviewer notes, it's a comprehensive wrestling game, with a large roster of 150 wrestlers, a detailed creator-wrestler mode, and over 40 secret characters. It was considered outstanding at the time, especially if you remembered Super Fire Pro Wrestling X Premium on the SNES. I remember those days of nose-gripping and face-stamping action. It's a proper grappler. Ready 2 rumbles. Round 2 scores a lower 2 out of 5. The reviewer wasn't impressed, stating the sad trend from the N64 version continues on the GBA. The graphics and sound are decent, but the gameplay is shallow. Basically mash the buttons and charge your rumble meter, and the fights aren't up to much. It's something you'd throw in the bin. Well. The next page is a review section from Planet Game Boy, featuring 3 games. First up is Iridian 3D for the Game Boy Advance. The reviewer notes its impressive visuals, but also its extreme difficulty. They compare it to Lilat Wars and Sega's Afterburner, praising its 80s electro soundtrack, but ultimately docking points due to the near-impossible challenge of avoiding damage. Still, they say if you are a hardcore gamer, you might like this one. Checkeri. Next is Tweety and the Magic Jewel, also for the GBA. It seems the reviewer wasn't too impressed, describing it as a poor Mario Party wannabe, and criticizing its lazy programming and lack of single-cart link-up play. They clearly thought Kemco could have done a lot better, so they give it 2 stars. Rear. Finally, there's High Heat Baseball, 2002. The reviewer praises its intuitive controls and silkily animated graphics, drawing comparisons to Konami's Power Pro series. However, they lament the fact that you can only play against the computer, which impacts its replayability. So despite the good points, it only gets 3 stars. The next page features game reviews for the Game Boy Color. First up is Mega Man Extreme, which the reviewer reckons is a bit of a rehash. They give it 2 stars, saying it's only for die-hard 2D platforming fans. Next is 1942, another Capcom title, getting 3 stars. The reviewer enjoyed it despite its repetitiveness, but was annoyed by the downgraded soundtrack, also noting the lack of 2-player. Finally, there's Ghosts and Goblins, which only gets 1 star. The reviewer slams this port as a shoddy conversion of the NES version and a waste of money. This page features 3 Game Boy Color game reviews. Dama alle game, dama alle. First up is Matchbox Emergency Patrol from Mattel, which the reviewer gives a score of 4 out of 5, noting it's a worthwhile purchase despite being somewhat repetitive. I remember this one, a top-down racer, where you play as a cop or firefighter. It was a simple game, but I recall it being quite fun for a bit. Next is Dragon's Lair from Capcom. The reviewer absolutely slams it with a score of 1 out of 5, calling it retropoop. Ouch. They reckon the gameplay is terrible, relying on button mashing and luck. I never played this version, but I remember the arcade game being notoriously difficult. Gah. Finally, there's Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine from THQ. This one gets a 3 out of 5. The reviewer states it's an enjoyable confection, a perfect dark GB-style isometric platformer, with a healthy amount of exploring and puzzles. It also features plenty of stuff to collect. The reviewer also notes that while it's not on par with Perfect Dark or Zelda, it is still an enjoyable game, and there are far worse platformers on the planet. The next page is a bit of a tips and tricks roundup, aimed squarely at Game Boy Advance owners. We've got Professor Oak dispensing advice on the Pokemon trading card game, touching on deck strategies with mentions of Magikarp, Gyarados, Vaporeon, and Zapdos. There's also a section dedicated to unlocking content in F-Zero Advance, detailing how to get your hands on new machines and classes. Lastly, there are some cheat codes for Harvest Moon 2, using an action replay cartridge. These are the usual sort of thing. Infinite cash, infinite seeds for turnips and potatoes, and codes for different crops like asparagus, tomato, corn and rosemary. It's the kind of stuff that was always floating around back then, usually written down in a school notebook. The next page is the Game Boy Gallery, featuring user-submitted photos taken with the Game Boy camera. The theme seems to be spooky or unusual images, fitting the "Darkness Falls Across the Land" tagline. The page is encouraging readers to send in their own freaks in association with Joytech, offering an action pack as a monthly prize. There are several user-submitted Game Boy camera photos with captions, some of which are a bit odd, including a winner declared to be a very worrying individual, with the police having been notified. Some of the funny captions include the comment about someone guffed and needing environmental health to clear West Sussex. Also included is the address to send in your pictures. The next page, blimey, that's a proper blast from the past. It's the cover of N64 Arena, issue 57. Big splash for Kirby 64, the Crystal Shards and Mario Party 3, two very different beasts I recall. Kirby 64 getting a review. The pink sucker finally flops exhausted onto UK shores, they write. Sounds about right, it was a bit late to the party, wasn't it? Still, a solid platformer, though maybe a bit too easy for some. Quancha. Then there's Mario Party 3, another one, eh? Another version of the best party game of all time? Sounds amazing, doesn't it? They ask, and I guess they're banking on that party game magic to sell it. Matz's latest, they say. That's Martin Watts, the editor. Also, a little promo for the import arena. The games they're playing in America and Japan. The text states. Always good to see what those Yanks and Japanese gamers were getting their mitts on. This page is a review page from the magazine, kicking off with a section called How It Works, explaining their review process. They highlight essential information about the game Metroid 64, which of course never actually came out, including its compatibility with various N64 accessories. There's also a passport-compatible logo, useful for importing games. The review itself is broken down into pluses and minuses, if you like this, and then ratings for visuals, sounds, mastery and lifespan, culminating in a verdict score of 90%. They also break down what the score means, and the criteria for a star game badge. Finally, there's a humorous Team 64 Inches section with photos and quirky captions about the staff and their supposed antics after taking hints from Kirby. They include Mark Green, Dark Mark, Judd Webb, Geraint Evans, Paul Edwards, Alan Madrell and Steve Jalim. The game of the month for each of them is Kirby 64. This page is all about Kirby 64, the Crystal Shards. There's a previously an N64 section showcasing screenshots from earlier coverage. They're highlighting the game's power-up system and level design. The review text is a bit tongue-in-cheek, making light of the fact the game took a while to arrive in the UK. A bit cheeky, really. There's an info burst with the usual details. It's a 128 megabit cart, supports 14 players, and cost around £45 at the time. They're poking fun at the delay by saying it's been mouldering in a warehouse. This page focuses on Kirby 64, the Crystal Shards, a game I remember being quite charming back in August 2001. The review here talks about the Fat Mix ability, a gameplay mechanic where you can combine Kirby's powers for enhanced attacks. There are screenshots that demonstrate how different combinations work, like Stone and Spark, Bomb and Needle, or Burn and Frost. They rate each combination. There's a section about how Kirby can swallow enemies and spit them out again, or use them for combo powers. The review makes note of the slightly wrinkly balloon-like skin of Kirby in this N64 outing, and it closes by saying there's plenty to discover. It notes how they had reviewed the game back in September 2000. The next page is a review of Kirby 64, the Crystal Shards for the Nintendo 64. It showcases the game's visuals and gameplay, highlighting Kirby's ability to combine power-ups, and its challenging nature. Screenshots illustrate various abilities like flying, swimming, ducking, and jumping, emphasizing the game's experimental and versatile design. It mentions the boss battles, describing the enemies as weird and progressively challenging. The reviewer seems to be impressed with the game's graphics and gameplay, calling it one of the best-looking 2D platformers around at the time. The next page features a review of Kirby 64, the Crystal Shards. Fun size fun, the headline proclaims, suggesting the minigames are a bit of light entertainment, raising a smile for half an hour or so. They mention enjoying the game where you make the floor disappear. The review touches on the fact that it's similar in length to Mario Advance, and that you can avoid enemies and barrel through levels using effective powers. They find the game strangely enjoyable to hover, swim, and explode through the levels. The reviewer notes simplicity isn't good in everyone's book and finds the boss tactics repetitive. The verdict is that if the levels weren't so simple, it could have been a star game. They find the backgrounds worth a peek as they move around, creating a peculiar 2D/3D effect. Alan Madrell is the reviewer on this one. Buyipe. The pluses and minuses section praises the brilliant combination powers, versatile main character, and amusingly crazy enemies. The negatives point out that it's way too easy, with pretty pointless minigames and a bit repetitive. If you like this, the magazine suggests Yoshi's Story on the Nintendo 64. The visuals are described as tasty looking with cute cutscenes, and the sounds as good, plinky fairy tale tunes. Mastery is low, with the analog stick only used in the minigames, and the lifespan is short. The final verdict gives it a 72%, stating there's nought wrong with 2D gaming, but Kirby ends up as a second-rate platformer with first-rate innovations, worth renting over a weekend. There are also call-outs describing in-game moments, such as, "We call this move the happening lobster," and "Bright and simple, just the way we like our fun to be. Now jump, fool." These are just little snippets to highlight particular elements of the game. Chester. This page is from the Import Arena section of the magazine, and it's all about Mario Party 3 on the N64. Back in the day, these import sections were gold for us UK gamers eager to get our hands on games before their official release, which could sometimes take ages. Pessimil. The reviewer seems a bit miffed about some of the minigames, calling them mini-lame and complaining about the luck-based elements, and what sounds like patronizing questions on the Toad tile. I can see their point, some of those minigames could be a right pain. The game is described as passport compatible, meaning you could play it on a UK console with a converter cartridge. They mention the game being out in Japan and the US now, but not yet in the UK. The infoburst gives details like it being a 128 megabit cart, and supports 14 players but doesn't support any of the expansion or transfer packs. There are some familiar faces from the Mario universe on the page, like Bowser, Peach, Yoshi, Mario, Luigi, Wario, Waluigi and Goomba. This page is a review of Mario Party 3 on the Nintendo 64, which came out around August 2001. The reviewer seems a bit jaded, suggesting it's more of the same from Hudson Soft. There's a section called Hit Me Baby One More Time, showcasing various minigames. Minigames like Awful Tower, requiring patience to climb a tower of moving blocks, or Water World, a racing game on an oval track where balance is key. Then there's Pump and Away, a Toon-2 timing-based game to launch rockets. Aces High is another minigame where players fly winged rockets and shoot down opponents. Storm Chasers involves moving a piranha plant around a desert. Pinaway. The Action Stations section mentions events that spice up the board game. The reviewer isn't impressed with the plot, calling it a rehash of Mario Party 2's story. The goal of the game is simple: collect as many coins and stars as possible. The review concludes that the flow of play on the map is ruined. There are also mentions of Goombatham tiles and item shops on the board. The next page is a review of Mario Party 3 on the Nintendo 64, going over the pluses and minuses. It highlights the multiplayer fun and minigames as positives, but notes that it isn't too different from its predecessors, has a ropey presentation, and the computer cheats. If you enjoy this, they recommend Mario Party 2 for the N64. Illus. The review mentions the boards like Chilly Waters, Bloober Sea, Spiny Desert, Woody Woods, and Creepy Cavern. There's a section on visuals, saying they're bright but could be better. They point out issues with character models, jaggy edges, and hurried menus. The reviewer felt the single player was lacking. While it's still fun with friends, the review concludes that it's just another Mario Party, giving it a score of 74%. This page is the cover of Club 64 magazine, dedicated to Nintendo 64 owners. The main feature this month is Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, with a promise of cheat codes inside. There are also regular sections, like Club 64 Mailbox, Tips Extra, Game On, I'm the Best, and Dr. Kit's Game Clinic. There's a mention of a directory covering all N64 games, and a subscription offer. Finally, there's a voucher for £5 off any game over £30, and a reference to page 69 for another free voucher. At the bottom, it shows the month and year of the magazine, August 2001. This page features the Club 64 mailbox section of the magazine, where readers' letters are answered. Someone from Norway has made Nintendo figures from Conker's Bad Fur Day which look brilliant, and a reader questions some inconsistencies in previous issues regarding Mario Kart 64's Moo Moo Farm and locations in an N64 50 Seconds article. There are also comments on Mario Party 2 and GoldenEye. A reader recounts their experience at the Pokemon Gold/Silver launch event, and another complains about ripping a page out of a fashion magazine, and someone writes in about the WWF No Mercy GameSave bug, and praises THQ for their response and exchange program. There's also a humorous letter about playing a Game Boy one-handed, and another about a bad mother who plays her kid's Game Boy while he's asleep. This page is the Club 64 mailbox section, where readers share their thoughts and questions. One reader asks about a children's TV program showing how to make an ocarina and playing Zelda's Lullaby. Another wonders if Rare, the game developer, is running out of ideas. There is a query about the adult anime Ghost in the Shell and a suggestion for a new magazine feature called Lousy Bargain Hunters to highlight ridiculously expensive game prices. A reader points out a Star Trek II-1 reference, noticing the Triforce symbol on Vulcan priest's robes and connects it to the Lilat Wars game, and if there is the possibility of the Borg to feature in Star Fox Adventures. The page also highlights two N64 fan websites, Pure Nintendo and the Nintendo Lifestyle. Pure Nintendo is described as a site with news, previews, reviews, and cheats for N64, GameCube, and Game Boy games. The Nintendo Lifestyle is praised for its high-quality writing and insightful articles. Finally, there's a section with armelting mobile melodies, featuring N64-related ringtones. Readers have submitted Zelda themes, and the page includes musical notation for Zelda's Serenade of Water, Zelda's Minuet of Forest, Super Mario's Overworld theme, and Perfect Dark's Carrington Institute. This page is a mixed bag. In it, we've got the bonus letters section where readers are having a laugh, followed by Bargain Hunter, with the best deals on N64 games at places like Currys and Virgin, Jet Force Gemini for a $5, bargain. Then there's the So Tell Me This section, where readers ask questions, like how much the GameCube will cost, and the magazine gives its educated guesses, like around £160. Someone asks about Star Fox on the Game Boy Advance, always a hope for those SNES classics. Then there's a bit where a reader reminisces about the biggest craze that was Pokemon, and how N64 Magazine nearly became Pikachu Magazine. Ha! If only they knew how big it would get. Finally, there's a Q&A about the Game Boy Advance, whether you need one cartridge for Mario Kart Advance multiplayer, what phones the mobile adapter will work with, and if all the original characters will be in Street Fighter II on the GBA. The next page features Club 64 Mailbox. It's where readers get to share their N64 experiences. Someone's found a way to use an N64 controller on their PC, playing emulated games no doubt, but they can't play Zelda on it. Another reader shares a photo of Bowser, with a blue hat in Mario Kart 64. There's also the start of a GameCube official magazine being made by Pete Hartree, inspired by Tom Wallace's homemade Ninty Mag. He even made a set of Ninty playing cards as a free gift on the cover. They are printed as they were free with the magazine on a page to cut out. The Game Boy Advance gets a mention, highlighting its improved screen, 32,000 colors and backwards compatibility with older Game Boy games. A reader asks about older N64 games being released on GameCube, and the writers are hopeful for the future, but also suggesting GBA games might make it. Finally, some Team Rocket fan art. The writer of this issue doesn't know who the artist is. Gaka. The next page focuses on Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, offering a how-to guide to navigate the trickiest parts of the game. It promises a way to whip-crack your way through the puzzles. There's a review excerpt where they call it an Ace Tomb Raider-style romp, spoiled only by an excess of 3D platforming clichés, giving it an 81% score. The page then breaks down general tips, with sections like whip tricks, talkie tippage, listening to what Indy says, stealth sniping, and machete madness. I remember this game being a bit of a mixed bag, but these tips would have been handy back in the day when you were stuck trying to figure out the next step. The next page features a Jones Machine article, offering assistance for Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine on the N64. It presents 4 teasers with questions and answers for tricky parts of the game. The teasers cover finding a hidden treasure, navigating the bell tower in the Shambhala Sanctuary, defeating the Ice Guardian, and opening a door on Palawan Lagoon. There are screenshots showing gameplay and visual clues for each section, giving hints and tips to get past these difficult areas. At the time, walkthroughs like this were pretty handy, especially when you were stuck in a game, and the internet wasn't quite the resource it is today. The next page features How to Club 64, offering hints and tips for several games. Teaser 5 helps players locate the pulley wheel in the Palawan volcano level of Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, with instructions on navigating the lava pools and crates. Teaser 6 tackles the Palawan temple level, specifically how to open a big door overlooking rope bridges. It involves working through caves, slashing rope bridges with your machete, using your whip to swim, and grabbing a key. Teaser 7 provides guidance on finding the last treasure and defeating the lava boss in the Palawan temple. It includes instructions on using Taklit's part to turn Indy invisible. Finally, Teaser 8 reveals how to unlock the Return to Peru bonus level, stating that you need to earn 15,000 IQ points by collecting all the treasure. The next page is a Club 64 Feet help section, focusing on Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine. It provides answers to player questions, including the locations of treasures in the Jeep Trek level, a solution for the cog puzzle in Teotihuacan, and cheat codes. For the Jeep Trek level, it lists several spots where treasures are hidden, emphasizing the need to explore on foot, suggesting one treasure is in Sophia's tent at the start, others are located in caves, near guards and planks, within crawlways, and using Ergen's part. The cog puzzle solution involves lining up cogs in a row and spinning them using buttons on the top floor, with specific instructions on how the buttons work and how to manipulate the cogs, and example instructions for door 1. Cheat codes are provided for level select, audio showroom, artwork, a development team photo, credits, and expert mode, all accessible by entering specific passwords in the options menu. I remember trying these out back in the day, seeing if I could unlock anything cool to show my mates. Warrington Mayor. The next page writes a tips page for some top N64 games. First up is Banjo-Tooie, with a tip on how to beat the Grunty Industries boss, that tricky blighter the welder. Gotta fire grenades into his gob while he's trying to suck you dry, apparently. Then there's Conker's Bad Fur Day, multiplayer tips, talking about character advantages. Apparently the Tedders are the fellas to pick, what with being full of stuffing and all, letting them survive longer falls. And a tip for dealing with the bots: don't go close up with swords, use tricks and machine guns instead. Foray, WWF No Mercy is next, with an easy win strategy involving the Russian neck drop. And a bit of advice on fixing glitchy cartridges, advising readers to check Club 64 for a fix. Finally there's Excitebike 64, with a shortcut on the construction yard course, and some extra game modes to unlock, like NES Excitebike, Soccer Mode, and Hill Climb. All good stuff back in the day if you were stuck. New! This page gives us a look at some cheat codes and tips for a few N64 games. First up is The World Is Not Enough, a decent Bond game, with some multiplayer weapon locations listed for the Labyrinth, Istanbul, and Field of Fire levels. Next we have Indiana Jones and the Infernal Machine, with some passcodes to unlock all areas, team photo, concept artwork, an audio showroom, and a development team picture. Then there's WCW vs NWO World Tour, with a tip on how to unmask wrestlers like Hannibal or Black Ninja, using the eye gouge or camel clutch submissions. Following that is Xena Warrior Princess, with cheats for Xena's green nose and a big head mode, as well as how to fight Gabrielle instead of Hope. Zelda Majora's Mask gets a mention with a strategy for beating Georg, that massive fish, involving Z-targeting, arrows, and Zora Link's electrical attack. Lastly, there's Perfect Dark, with a sneaky multiplayer tactic using poisoned knives. Finally, there's a section called Tip for the Top, with cheats for Kirby 64, advising players to collect all 72 crystal shards and finish every end-of-level boss to unlock all cutscenes and boss butch mode. There's also a game voucher for £5 off any game over £30. The next page is a Reader's Top 15 Tips section, offering tips and tricks for various N64 games. The tips cover a range of titles: Conker's Bad Fur Day with 2 tips, Zelda Ocarina of Time and Zelda Majora's Mask with 1 tip each, WWF No Mercy with 2 tips, Perfect Dark with 2 tips, Mario Tennis with 2 tips, F1 WGP2, Banjo-Tooie, and Rush 2049. There's also a form to submit your own tips, with the chance to win a prize and get featured in the magazine. It's all quite nostalgic, a reminder of simpler times when sharing game secrets was a big deal. This page features a section called Game On, and highlights 8 challenges for gamers to test their skills, focusing primarily on The Legend of Zelda, Majora's Mask. 4 challenges are detailed for Majora's Mask, including Cow Rescue. Players must prevent aliens from kidnapping cows at Romani Ranch, awarding medals based on arrow usage. Snowball Fight. The objective is to deflect Eno snowballs with Link's sword, earning medals for consecutive hits. Bell Bash. Players wearing the Goron mask try to pummel the bell at Stockpot Inn with punch combos. Vulture Vengeance. Players must defeat a thieving vulture in Milk Road, recording the time taken. The next page features Club 64, 8 challenges to test the best. It's all about putting a unique spin on some classic N64 games. First up is Rush 2049, tasking you with destroying a specific target car as many times as possible during a 3-lap race. Then there's Perfect Dark, where you have to escape Area 51 and use as few Super Dragon grenades as possible to push the hoverbike through a door. Sounds tricky, doesn't it? Mario Kart 64 gets a mention with a challenge to complete Toad's Turnpike without crashing, aiming for first place, and awarding medals based on your character choice. Gold for Bowser, Donkey Kong or Wario, silver for Mario or Luigi, and bronze for the smaller characters. Finally, GoldenEye is in the mix with a 4-player challenge, where one player, as Alec, is the ambassador, and can only use hand slaps. 2 players act as bodyguards with pistols, and the last player is the assassin with any weapon they choose. The page then invites readers to send in their own game challenges for a chance to win a pin badge or even an action replay cart. The magazine is keen for challenges related to Excitebike 64, Battle for Naboo, Conker's Bad Fur Day, and Indiana Jones. This page is all about high scores and leagues, something that was always a bit of fun back in the day. We've got star performance winners getting a shout out for their Pokemon Puzzle League skills, and Donkey Kong arcade scores. Blimey, some people had a lot of time on their hands. There's even a Mirage Joypad up for grabs for the best submission. They're still trying to get someone to crack their Banjo-Tooie challenge from a previous issue, which is a laugh. Looks like no one could manage it. There's also a section showing off high scores for Mickey's Speedway USA, which was a decent kart racer, and Perfect Dark, highlighting best times for various levels. Paul Williams from Wirral seems to be dominating. Perfect Dark, good on him. The next page is Dr. Kit's Game Clinic, where readers write in with their gaming queries and get advice. It's like an old-school advice column but for N64 games. Someone struggling with Castlevania, Legacy of Darkness, needing help finding the half-crest A. Dr. Kit's dishes out the solution involving rose gardens, sun cards and thorn keys. A player asks about the stone mask in Zelda, Majora's Mask. Dr. Kit's helpfully reminds them about the lens of truth and a red potion for a soldier in Icana. Another gamer is having trouble with Jet Force Gemini, specifically defeating the Mantids. Dr. Kit's advises on memorizing their attack patterns and using the right weapons at the right time. Yaratan. A Majora's Mask player needs help finding the hero's bow and hookshot. Dr. Kit's points them to Avel's chamber in Gerudo Fortress and reminds them about clearing the room first. Finally, someone wants to know about extra vehicles in Star Wars, Battle for Naboo. Dr. Kit's informs them about the Sith Infiltrator, ATT, and Swamp Speeder, and how to unlock them by earning gold and platinum medals. This page features a coming soon preview of Paper Mario for the N64. It shows Mario with a bow bomb, and a screenshot from the game, and that quirky witch Kammy Koopa flying on her broomstick. They're touting it as the first review, and billing N64 Magazine as the UK's best-selling independent publication. I remember when this came out, it was pretty exciting. A new Mario RPG was a big deal, especially with its unique paper aesthetic. This page is the cover of issue 58 of Planet 64, featuring Kirby 64, the Crystal Shards. It promises a guide to the game, plus the latest news on GameCube titles like Star Wars Rogue Leader, Dave Mirra BMX2, and Star Fox Adventures. There's also coverage of Luigi's Mansion, Wave Race, Blue Storm, and Donkey Kong Racing. Inside, readers could expect tons of great new tips and cheats, special investigations, and trusted reviews. A free Game Boy Advance tips book was included, and the next issue would feature Planet Game Boy with Street Fighter GBA, Pitfall GBA, Mega Man Extreme, and Zelda, Oracle Twins. It was on sale Wednesday, August 1st. There's also a form to reserve a copy of the next issue. Soulist.